Welcome back to today's episode of the EZAg Podcast, where innovative farming meets practical solutions. I'm your host, Matt Long, and we're going to talk about the max yield system again today. And more specifically, we're going to talk about harvest evaluation and things that come out of those harvest evaluations that we make that impact the next year's max yield system. So Jackson's joining us, and he's got some questions from some growers. We're going to try to answer those questions. If you have any other questions, feel free anytime to reach out to us through our social media, or just give me a call or an email, and we'll be glad to get back with you with information.
Okay, so to start it off, we kind of talked about fertility planning and in-season management, and we kind of touched on why the harvest evaluation is important. You want to just talk about that again, little review?
Yeah, obviously, I think all the pieces of the max yield system are building on each other. And harvest evaluation might be, I can't say any one of them is more important than the other, but if you don't get your harvest evaluation done, how do you know what you need to improve on in the next year's system? And so harvest evaluation, pretty critical point for making progress the next year. And that's something that I think, some people might be thinking about this max yield system and think, this is a 1 year, one shot wonder. And it's not really that, because there's so much we can't control about ag production. And so really what we're trying to do is make small improvements over time that create big returns at the end, or maximum returns at the end.
And then when we talk about harvest evaluation, what plays into that instead of just a final overall yield number?
Yeah, so we talked about that in a little bit the last episode. If we just wait till the end and we have the yield number, we got 90 bushels on this field and 120 on that field. All we know is the difference was 30 bushels. And there's a lot we can gain from, just making a couple rounds in the combine with the grower and kind of evaluating what went on in that field. So, if we've got a healthy, intact plant, we know that the other things we did likely impacted the outcome there. If we've got a crop that's been under stress, that's, got stalk rot and lodging, or ears are falling off in the ground and stuff like that, we need to go back and look at, what caused that? Was there something we could have done to help prevent that? And so that's part of harvest evaluation. Something that might be overlooked by a lot of people in harvest evaluation is just making a note of what types of weeds you see in the field when you're in the combine. So these are typically dead weeds if we're harvesting corn, but is it Palmer amaranth, or is it kochia, stuff like that. If you have those notes, that can help inform the crop protection plan of the max yield system the next time we've got that crop on that field. And so harvest evaluation is not just about the hybrid, it's not just about the yield, it's really about the whole thing, fertility, crop protection, how well did we do at everything we tried to do on this field.
So then we talked about how we go by field instead of a blanket. So why do you evaluate it as a field by field instead of just one whole average for the farm?
Every field's got different challenges and different opportunities. And so if we just manage it based on the average across the farm, we're not getting the highest return on every field on the farm, and we're not getting the highest return we can on our farm. And so the same thing's true about harvest evaluation. If we just tried to take for instance, the herbicide notes based on those weed control issues we had from one field and apply that to the whole farm, we might be over applying herbicide in 3/4 of the fields or more on the farm that don't need more weed control in that regard than the others. So,
okay, we know we use bushels per thousand to kind of measure how the crop performs. Is there anything else that goes into trying to measure that performance, or is there anything else that adds into bushels per thousand?
Yeah, one thing that can help you in bushels per thousand is knowing your actual final count. So, in the spring, we can go through and make those counts. We can look at how many full plants we have, how many 3/4 of plant we have, how many half plants, and how many runts we have. And so kind of knowing at the end of the season what that evaluation looked like early, and then what that evaluation looks like here at the combine can help us in understanding, how many bushels per 1,000 plants did we actually produce. Because if we just use the guy's population, 15,000, for instance, we might come up with 6. But we could go out and evaluate a stand and say, hey, this was only really 13,500 full ears, out in this field. And so then that bushels per 1,000 that we achieved is actually higher. Then the question is, if we dropped 15,000 seeds and we only have 13,500 full ears, what do we do wrong? Where's the other 10%? And if we can make up that 10%, we can make up a lot of yield next year.
What insights are some growers missing throughout their harvest data if they're just looking at yield maps and a final number?
I think the insights on a field-by-field basis are so important because every field is different. I mean, I've got some fields on my farm I know just always produce, and others that are always lagging. And if I just look at the number, that's all I know, And so getting out into the field and understanding what that crop looked like during, before harvest, I think is important. And taking notes on, what those issues are, so whether it's a weed control issue, whether it's a plant health issue, taking notes on those and using those to inform, the next year's plan, or the plan the next time that crop is on that field, I think is really important. Because you can't make any improvement by just kind of having your blinders on and doing everything the same as you've always done it.
And then during your harvest evaluation, what are you kind of looking at to make notes for next year's hybrid placement? Is there anything that plays into that?
Yeah, I think the next year's hybrid placement is something that we can make a lot of notes on in the combine, and some of that is from that crop health standpoint. And I really like to look at the variability that I think can be tied to the soil. And so, high pH or low pH is going to create variable plant health a lot of times. And so I like to look at that plant health, not just in one spot, but all the way throughout that field, or throughout multiple passes in that field when I'm on the combine, because that's kind of the thing that I think really helps inform that hybrid decision from a soil standpoint. The soil is affecting the crop health at the end of the season, and then that is what we can use to kind of make our decision for, hey, do we need a hybrid that can really withstand these variable soils, or is this soil really consistent and we can place anything on it?
Yeah, this kind of ties into that. Do you have any other examples of where your harvest evaluation kind of led into the next year that you really saw an increase in yield?
Yeah, I had a grower a few years ago who had a lot of stalk and crown rot in a couple fields. And so went out, evaluated it in his field, and then we had not harvested our test plots yet. And so we were able to go into the test plots and make evaluations on every hybrid in the plot on the amount of stalk and root rot or crown rot that those hybrids had. And so you don't get you don't just have high stalk and crown rot every year. That pressure is not always there. And so when you do, that's a time where your evaluations at harvest can really impact future cropping plans. And that's just one example there.
For anybody that's not doing any sort of harvest evaluation, what's the biggest thing they're missing out on?
Well, I think they're obviously missing out on maximizing, their return on a field-by-field basis, because there's like we've talked about, there's just so many things that you can see in the combine that you can implement. You can implement most of them for free into next year's max yield system plan, and gain a higher return and better crop from it. So
to wrap up my questions here, kind of how does the harvest evaluation really play into the beginning of next year in the crop planning, kind of wrap everything up with the max yield system?
Yeah, so I mean, we like to start our crop plans with our growers early. We want to have most of those done before harvest starts. And so the thing that we're doing with the harvest evaluation is we're taking field specific notes that can impact every part of the max yield system. So we're going to take some field specific notes that are going to possibly change some of the decisions we made in the crop plan, although we don't see a lot of those. But hybrid, from the seed plan, we're gonna dial in our hybrid placement after we get through those harvest evaluations. We're gonna dial in our fertility plan. We're gonna dial in the crop protection plan. And so the harvest evaluation can really, we might have all of those decisions done, say, by the 1st of September. But when we say they're done, it means we've roughed them out. And then with the harvest evaluation data, we're going to just dial them all in, so that we have that final plan going into spring planting.
Yeah, that wraps up my questions. So,
well, I appreciate you standing in for the growers today and helping us share this information about the max yield system again, Jackson. So remember to tune into the EZAg Podcast, where ag is easy. That's all for today. I'm Matt Long. Grow your yield, grow your legacy, grow your farm with Axis Seed.